Welcome back, everyone. On this flight, we're going to be flying through all sorts of crazy weather and icing conditions to land at Everette Airport in Seattle, Washington. This is where they build Boeing airplanes, by the way. Once we land, we're going to go check out the History of Flight Museum at Boeing Field. There's so much to see, such as the SR71 Blackbird and the mighty J58 engines that power it, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner up close, which they make here in Everett, a 747 test bed, Air Force One 707, which is really cool because we'll get to see where past presidents drank coffee and did number 2. We'll also check out the Concorde and basically every military aircraft you can imagine. And we'll even stand beside an actual F1 rocket motor in the Apollo Space exhibit here at Boeing Field. Hands down, one of the most incredible aviation museums on the planet. It's going to be one heck of a weekend, so let's go. Welcome back, everyone. Now, every time you fly to Seattle, you have to contend with lots of adverse weather conditions because it's on the coast, so there's lots of moisture. In fact, you can already see as we're descending, we're building up ice on the leading edges and the windshield. You can actually see and hear those water droplets as they contact the airplane and turn into ice. Now, the captain's side windshield is heated, so he doesn't have that icing problem. But because ice is so dangerous for aircraft, we have to make sure all of our anti-icing and de-icing equipment is on and operational. So we're going to do our icing checklist, make sure the pitot and stall heat is on, make sure the inertial separators are on so we don't ingest any ice coming off the engines, the prop and windshield heat is on, and the de-icing boots located on the leading edge of the wing, they're pneumatic, they inflate and break the ice off, as you'll see right there. I'll replay it again so you can see that ice breaking off as they inflate. And here it is in slow motion. Now, these de-icing boots are located on the leading edge of the wings, the tail, and the horizontal stabilizer. We call this shedding ice, as the ice breaks off the wing, and we have to do this repeatedly depending on how severe the icing conditions are. Now we're going to fly the arrival procedure as I've got displayed here on the Garmin Pilot app. We're going to go direct to Stilla first. We can probably expect vectors for the ILS Zulu runway 16 right, which is easy to display on the Garmin Pilot app. And of course, we have the entire flight plan, the arrival and the approach loaded into the Garmin GTN 750 touchscreen display. So everything is lined up and ready for us to fly this approach. And here's a close-up view of the chart itself. We're first going to fly towards the waypoint Webby. Then we're going to make a left-hand turn to intercept the ILS. We'll have to make sure we turn our CDI over to the ILS indicator, and then we're going to fly inbound towards this waypoint Jugba, and then we do have a glide path check of 3,000 feet. So as we're on the ILS, when we cross Jugba, we should be at 3,000 feet. After that, we'll continue on the ILS down to our minimum altitude of 770 feet, which will bring us about 200 feet above the runway. We have to have a half-mile visibility for this, or we won't see the runway. Obviously, if we don't see the runway, we have to fly the missed approach. We're going to overshoot and maybe try again or go to our alternate airport. Now, I'm going to set our minimum altitudes here on the Garmin G600. That way it gives us a warning once we reach our minimums. And by the way, this is the approach checklist that I use. It's an acronym I made up called RATMO AGS. It's great for helping you brief and plan your approaches and set up the airplane properly. Now, as we descended, we eventually got into a little bit warmer temperatures, even got a little bit of rain, which washed all that ice away from the windshield. The co-pilot side is not heated, the captain's side is, so it's nice that I can finally see out that front windshield for when we break out of the clouds. And you're probably wondering why I'm flying in the co-pilot spot, and that's because the other pilot is building up his experience in this airplane, so I'm providing mentorship from the co-pilot seat. And of course, we have lots of weather, so it does help to have two pilots. Now, I've got 3,000 feet set into the altitude pre-select, and I'm just going to double check the CDI for the ILS, make sure it's set to the right heading, so that when we turn to intercept it, we are on the right course. Now, as expected, ATC cleared us for vectors to the ILS, so we're going to cut the corner on the arrival procedure. We're not going to fly to all the waypoints, which will save us a little bit of time, as you can see on the map there. And we're getting low enough now that all the precipitation has turned to rain, so it should have melted off any ice that was left over, which we have to be careful about that we do not ingest it into these turbine engines, because if we have some ice on the prop spinners, as soon as we hit the rain, that ice is coming off and we could ingest it. So it's important that we have the inertial separators open on these Pratt & Whitney engines. can see there on the map where we're cutting the corner. And we're heading 300 right now. And we're kind of between these layers of cloud. And that's what I love about flying to the coast, especially Seattle. It's always like this. Every layer of cloud has its own properties, so the flying is never boring. And for those of you who are new pilots, I'd like to reiterate the 4 priorities as a pilot: aviate, navigate, communicate, and then obviously coffee, tea, and serving stale pretzels is the last priority, especially when you're flying IFR. It's very important that you always remember to fly the airplane first, no matter what aircraft you're flying, whether it's a small airplane or a large jet. There's a view of the captain's side Garmin G600, Garmin GTN 750s, and all those green lights that you saw up there, those are our anti-icing lights, just confirming that the windshield heat is on, the inertial separators are open, and that everything's working properly. We're cleared to heading 250 degrees. We're almost descended to 3,000 feet now, which we'll hold that altitude until we're established on the ILS and can follow the glide slope to the runway. We're still in cloud. There's another layer below us now we're going to have to punch through in order to see the ground. So lots of interesting weather. We have 4 passengers in the back, which reminds you to make smooth control inputs so that you don't get those people disoriented. Because remember, when they look out the window, all they see are clouds too. So we want to make sure it's an enjoyable ride for them. I mean, they've been eating stale pretzels for the last 2 hours. So last thing we want to do is turn their stomach with some sharp turns if they aren't expecting it. And there's our waypoint WebV that air traffic control has given us vectors towards. And we're going to start a left-hand turn here to intercept the localizer and then the ILS for runway 16 right. That layer of cloud ahead of us just below the airplane is looking pretty thick, so I imagine we will be in the clouds for the majority of this approach. You can see the CDI coming in there, showing us our track for the ILS, and that'll provide us lateral navigation towards the runway, so we're going to continue our left-hand turn to intercept that. And we're going to maintain 3,000 feet because we haven't intercepted the glide slope, which is going to give us our glide profile to the runway. So we're going to maintain 3,000 for now. I'm always referencing the chart on the Garmin Pilot app here to make sure that we are doing everything properly. 770 is our minimum altitude. If we get below that, we have done something seriously wrong, and that is when you could run into something. There's been lots of accidents attributed to airplanes ducking below minimums while they're still in cloud and then hitting terrain. So we do not want to do that. And at this point, it's basically a waiting game. We're going to follow this track until we intercept the glide slope, which you'll see in a few moments. I'm just going to make sure we have all of our frequencies put in here for tower. Stay ahead of the airplane. Make sure you have all your tower frequencies pre-set up so that all you have to do is switch them over. Even the ground frequencies, it's a lot of help to have that stuff in the airplane before you land. Reduces workload after touchdown. And the clouds are kind of teasing us right now. We can see the ground through little spaces in the clouds. So we're going to do our landing checklist now. Belts, brakes, gear, undercarriage, meaning make sure the gear is down, mixtures, props, and switches. It's my BB Gumps checklist. You've seen me do it on all my other videos. Very important. Do it in conjunction with the actual airplane checklist. Just a good way to double check everything before you land. If you haven't noticed, we are a little bit below the glide slope, a little bit left of track, so Captain Logan in the left seat there is going to correct for that. We got 15 degrees of flaps, still in cloud, so as co-pilot, when we get closer to the runway, I'm going to start looking outside, see if I see any cues of the runway. But nothing yet. Remember, our minimums are at 770 feet, so at that point, if we don't see the runway, we have to overshoot. Now they've transferred us to the tower frequency, and right there we pop onto the clouds. Beautiful view of the Everett, Washington area. Gonna punch through the last few of these little puffy clouds. We've corrected now. We are right on track and right on the glide slope. We're adding a little bit more flaps. We're gonna go 30 degrees of flaps. The Garmin synthetic vision showing us the runway straight ahead. And even though we can see the ground, we still can't see the runway. It's obscured by a cloud, so we have to maintain this ILS approach precisely until we have confirmation we can see the runway lights or the runway itself. I love this. We're just going to pop through a few more of these little clouds. We've got the beach right below us. And there it is, the runway straight ahead. The glide path lights, 2 red, 2 white, indicating we are on the right glide path. And our short final checks, gear, props, flaps, make sure we have a clearance to land, and then again, check that the landing gear is down. Another perk of having 2 pilots is while Logan flies the airplane, I can pull up the airport diagram so we know where we're going to be taxiing. If you didn't know this already, Everette Airport is where the Boeing factory is located. So they're building all the Boeing jets here. It is massive. And all those airplanes that are green, they are that color because they're fresh off the factory floor and they haven't been painted yet. Now we're cleared to land. The runway is ours. We're approaching at about 120 knots. We're going to cross the threshold at about 105. We're going to see how smooth of a landing Logan's going to make here. It's a little bit bumpy. You see the air's a little bit unstable. Come flying across this road. Everybody's probably looking at us thinking, that's weird, that doesn't look like a Boeing. And there we go, nice touchdown. Not bad for a guy that hasn't flown the airplane for a while. We're bringing the flaps up. We're going to apply a little bit of beta to slow the airplane up. Use minimal braking. Make sure we exit at the proper taxiway. And check out all those brand new Boeing 777s like freshly baked cookies right out of the Mr. Christie factory. Absolutely incredible. Turn the pressurization off. And just admire our taxi in because we're going to be headed to the Boeing History of Flight Museum once we get parked. We first got to navigate our way across the airport. We found our ramp guy here. He's going to guide us in. Take off my flying eye sunglasses. Highly recommend getting a pair of those. Shut the engines down. Beautiful sound of those Pratt & Whitney turbines. Despite the rain, I'm all smiles. I'm going to give Logan a little fist bump here for doing all the hard work and making this approach look a lot simpler than it was. So once the airplane's parked, we've got no time to waste because we're in Seattle and we have a lot we need to do. If you haven't been to Seattle, it's an amazing place, very industrious city, lots of good sports teams, tons of stuff to do in the outdoors. It's incredible. But this time, we came for the airplanes. This place is the mecca of aviation. So stop number 1 is to the Boeing Museum of Flight. I've been here many times before and I feel like a kid in a candy shop. I cannot wait. Here are some of the highlights. Now, when you first walk into the museum, you are greeted by, you guessed it, an SR71 Blackbird. And you can crawl underneath this thing and get a good look at all the systems, the landing gear, and the engines. I'm standing underneath the nose landing gear right now, like I have a dozen times before, but this still feels like the first time.
This is the coolest part. Check it out.
Now, the SR71 Blackbird was powered by 2 J58 jet engines that produced over 31,000 pounds of thrust each and propelled the aircraft to over Mach 3.5. The engineering on this thing is incredible because it's air breathing up at some of the highest altitudes and at the highest speeds. Right now we're looking at the exhaust and where the afterburner fuel nozzles are located. Absolutely incredible. You can just imagine the immense power and thrust coming out of these 2 engines. So we're standing at the back of the SR71 right now, and this yellow cart here, this is what they used to start the mighty J58 jet engines. 2 Wildcat V8s tied together at full power, driving a common shaft. You can actually see that shaft here with the little spline on it. That's what's required just to start these massive engines. And you can actually see the input spline there where you hook that cart up and get these engines roaring. There are videos online showing this start sequence. It is incredible.
So this is really interesting. Check this out. So the pilot goes there and your passengers are inside the airplane. So the pilot can jump out and no one would know.
Yes, we have come a long ways over the last 120 years of flying. Check out this Boeing Model 80A. It's got 3 engines on it.
So this is what pure luxury would look like back in 1929.
And check out the door handle. That's the first thing I noticed, was that this was like having your own flying house. Got little lamp shades in there. It's just incredible. And the main showroom has a bunch of fighter jets, such as this F4 Phantom with lots of rockets on its pylons, as well as this Vought Crusader. Really cool airplane because the wings fold up. And then we have a Lockheed Electra, same airplane that Amelia Earhart attempted to fly around the world. Lots of different aircraft in this first part of the exhibit, including this little air car thing. Next was the Apollo exhibit, and what I found to be the most impressive thing here was the F1 rocket motor from the Saturn V Apollo missions. This is what sent humans to the moon, and it is unbelievable. The fuel pump alone was 55,000 horsepower and pumped 15,000 gallons of rocket fuel into the engine per minute. It is monstrous. We're talking about more horsepower than you could ever imagine. What we're looking at here is the injector plate. That's where the fuel's coming through, and here's kind of a busted up engine that they pulled off the bottom of the ocean. It's kind of split open, and the part on top, that is that fuel pump I'm talking about. They also had one of the lunar rovers there, as well as one of the Apollo command modules. This thing is super cool. All the switches from the 1960s. That's what still blows my mind, is that this happened that long ago. Next, we stopped in at the World War I and World War II exhibits, and last time I was here, somehow I missed the World War I section, but it is well worth it. Some amazing airplanes. You can see the evolution of military aircraft through this exhibit. I mean, the airplane wasn't invented for that long before the world was at war, and what I found really interesting was the evolution of different types of aircraft engines. And World War I was all about trench warfare. I love this quote from one of the pilots regarding the soldiers in the trenches. It read, "Those boys sure deserve a lot of credit. I wouldn't trade places with them for all the girls in Paris." And that is why Remembrance Day is so important. The sacrifice that our grandparents and great-grandparents made during World War I and World War II should never be forgotten. Some of these pictures really hit it home for me in this exhibit, such as this one with all these soldiers blinded by gases during the trench warfare. Next, I decided to go to the World War II exhibit, which has some incredible airplanes, obviously a Corsair, and this was really cool. It was a Corsair engine with a cutaway version next to it. Really cool to see the inside workings of this massive radial engine. You can see the layers of cylinders and that distributor cap. So cool to see an engine cutaway like this with the massive supercharger and all its other components. This engine output about 2,000 horsepower. And of course they had a P-51 Mustang with the mighty V12 Merlin engine right next to it. And all these airplanes are armed to the teeth, machine guns everywhere. Really cool view of the top of the P-51 there. Lots of other airplanes to check out in the World War II exhibit. And what I found fascinating was this section dedicated to women in aviation during the war. Obviously most pilots were male at the time, but there were lots of lady fighter pilots flying the fastest, most deadly fighter planes from World War II. Really cool to see. Next, we checked out the original Boeing factory exhibit. Lots of really cool things here going back to when Boeing first started. It was really neat to see some of the first aircraft designs. They even had a couple of the first turbine engines on display. It said do not touch, but obviously I can't help but touch things like this. It's just the way it is. And then we crossed over to this large exhibit on the other side. They have a whole bunch of cool space stuff in this building, including a Soyuz capsule. You can see how charred this thing is. Really fascinating to see. Just the immense heat that these things have to deal with when they re-enter the atmosphere from the International Space Station. And there's also lots to see from the space shuttle program that was on display, such as this orbital maneuvering system. Once we were done there, we went outside to this massive building, which housed some of the coolest airplanes, such as the Concorde, Air Force One, 747, the Dreamliner, a B-29 bomber. You could just walk between all these airplanes, and it was incredible. And if you love horsepower, then you'll love seeing the Dreamliner's engine. This is the GE-NX turbofan. Absolutely stunning. Just a piece of artwork to have on display here right next to the Dreamliner itself. 76,000 pounds of thrust is what each engine outputs. Absolutely incredible. Call on my friend Sheena to give us a proper tour of the 787 Dreamliner. Had to call out my friend Sheena, who currently flies a 787. Would have loved to have her here to show me around. Next, I wanted to check out the Boeing 747 testbed. I believe this is one of the first 747s to come off the production line. It is massive. If you've never stood next to a 747 in real life, then this is the place to do it. Now, on board, they had a whole bunch of testing equipment to test the aerodynamics of the airplane, the weight and balance. All these drums they could fill with water so they could test it at different weights. They also had a Chinook helicopter parked right next to the 747. Never seen one of these up close. Also had a F-14 Tomcat. If you haven't seen Top Gun, then shame on you. They also had a Harrier jet, this is vertical takeoff and landing, and surprisingly smaller than you expect. They also had a Prowler from an aircraft carrier, pretty cool to check out. But then it was on to the Air Force One 707. All the past presidents that have flown on this airplane is incredible. So we decided to go on board and see what it was like to live the presidential lifestyle back in the 60s. Now, I gotta be honest, I expected lots of shag carpet, some old wood finishings that would look like grandma's house, but check out this cockpit. It is retro. Of course, when I did my flight training, it was all analog gauges as well, but this is straight out of the 60s. If you had to make a phone call from Air Force One, that's the office to do it in. I gotta be honest, a lot less shag carpet than I expected, but lots of comfy seats for the president as well as all the other personnel on board. And of course, the most important thing on any aircraft, lots of coffee and a lavatory for when the coffee hits, where the president had to take a poop from time to time. So the 707 Air Force One was really cool to see. However, we still have the Concorde left. Now, the main thing I wanted to check out here were the huge engines that propel this thing to Mach 2. If you haven't heard of the Concorde, then let me put it this way. New York to London in 3 hours. And check out those engines. They have full afterburner, and this really interesting wheel at the back is to prevent it from having a tail strike. And of course, it's painted in the British Airways colors. Beautiful airplane, so impressive to stand underneath it because it stands so tall. Now, my phone died before I was able to get footage of the inside, so we decided to head back to catch an Everette Silvertips hockey game because we were here actually with the owner. So yeah, we were hanging out with him and cheering his team on. The next day, it was back to the airport to fly through all that crazy weather again. You're definitely going to want to stay tuned for the next video because we actually fly a missed approach. The weather was that bad at our destination. So thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, if you're new to the channel, welcome aboard. Little cheers to all the new viewers. And if you're curious on what it's like to become a pilot, what the process is, how to get your first aviation job, then I've got videos on my channel that you can check out to help get you started. Absolutely love and appreciate all the support, everybody. So we'll catch you on the next adventure. Happy and safe flying, everybody. Cheers.